Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
I was called in and told, basically, take it or else. I declined. I asked a bunch of questions. Can you legally do this? Do I not have legal rights? Questions weren't really answered. I was just told that we're doing it. This is the way things are going to go. And if you don't comply, you're going home tonight.
Joe was not fired. Joe quit. Because conditions to work on the job was take a test.
And do you have a policy that I could...
We have a dispatcher here. I have all kinds of work. Joe can go to work anywhere else. But when the next company says, come in my doors, you have to have a test. What do I say to them?
Perhaps some of the questions I've outlined in my email?
No, your questions, ask the politician about your question. I'm running a $500 million business here, and I'm going to protect the majority.
Fred spent more time deflecting issues onto me and touting some rights infringements about guys getting security clearances. Please. Here in Ontario, the case-demic continues with no end in sight. It stands to reason, though, that if people simply weren't being tested, the endless coverage of cases wouldn't be able to continue. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini, bringing you a story of coercion where healthy union workers are being force tested with a PCR test whose product monograph states that it wasn't designed for this kind of use. Joe MacDonald was a foreman at Ontario Power Generation's Darlington Nuclear Centre. He's part of Local 721 Ironworkers Union, currently subcontracted to OPG through ACON. Apparently, Ken Hartwick, CEO and president of Ontario Power Generation, was invited to partake in a pilot project, or an experiment, with the Ministry of Health to implement a mandatory test for all workers using the Panbio Rapid Antigen Screening Test. In an informal screenshot shared with Joe by Local 721 business agent Neil MacDonald, in order to be tested, you must be without symptoms of COVID-19 and submit to testing no more than twice every 4 weeks. Here's what Joe had to say about what happened to him when he questioned this implementation and wanted to see an actual policy with protocols to back it up.
I can't even tell you the exact date it became mandatory. I think it was around the 17th of December, at which point I was called in and told, basically, take it or else. I declined. I asked a bunch of questions. Can you legally do this? Do I not have legal rights? Questions weren't really answered. I was just told that we're doing it. This is the way things are going to go. And if you don't comply, you're going home tonight. Mm-hmm. So that's in essence what happened.
And you just wanted some clarification. You had some questions, false positive rate, false negative rate.
That's correct, yeah.
What was the protocol in place? If you tested positive, is it paid, unpaid? What are the next steps? Where's the policy, essentially?
Well, of course. I do have a problem with being taken in and tested against my will. But they couldn't answer any questions. They couldn't answer, the false positive rate of either the initial test, which I believe is a Bennett test, and then the PCR test that I'd be sent for later, and what would happen in between. I was told that there is a policy in place where they would pay you for the next day when you go to be tested, and that would be the PCR test. But after that, it was completely unclear what would happen. So if you had a second positive test, you'd likely be sitting at home for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm.
And then is there a protocol where you have to have 2 back-to-back negatives within 24 hours? That's what I've been hearing, a few rumblings.
Very unclear.
How do you get back to work at that point? Is it simply 14 days of quarantine, or is it more testing? Now, this is the rapid antibody test that's being mandated for all union employees.
Correct.
And the follow-up is supposedly a PCR test by Shoppers Drug Mart. I think it was about $200 for that test. Do you know if the union was covering that amount?
Yeah, they actually had their own testing site in Pickering that they were sending people to. So I believe they were covering all of that. They would have to.
Okay.
To tell the truth, I don't know. Everything was rolled out very quickly. It was kind of like, just do this or else. And I've always had a problem with things like that. You just do it. That's it.
no questions asked.
Exactly.
And you were asking questions, like I said, and then what was the or else? What happened to you?
The or else was I was told to go home that night. They gave me a deadline of, I believe, 10 p.m., because I was working the night shift, to have the test done by. I said I wasn't going to be ready by 10 p.m. I said I had a bunch of questions that I needed answered first. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, this is your last night. So that was how it went. Mm-hmm. They actually sent me on a job after that. I completed the job, and then they came over and said, you're going home. Now, I wasn't escorted out like some people have been, but, you know.
Yeah, Joe is not alone in this situation. That's the other factor here, is that I've heard from a few different employees, oddly enough, specifically from Darlington Nuclear, not in the same union, different unions, who have been coerced into this testing over threats of job loss. And now you have actually lost your job.
I have. Yes.
Because you refused to consent to this forced testing, especially when none of your questions could be clearly answered.
Oh, absolutely.
And no policy was laid out for you to be able to gauge what happens next.
And I'd like to say that I'm definitely not in the minority. The majority of people took the test only because they were afraid of their jobs. The vast majority of people did not want to. And I kind of like to speak to the unions out there, not just my particular union, because they're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. The membership does not want this. Why are we acquiescing to the demands of an employer without consenting the membership? Mm-hmm. And this goes for every union in Ontario that I'm aware of. My problem is, where does it go from here? We all know the vaccine will be next. And after that, what? When do we actually draw the line and say, no, this is my body? I make the decisions for myself. I mean, to me, that's a pretty basic right as a Canadian. I've done a little bit of reading in the Canadian Constitution, Charter of Rights, and I don't see where anyone has these rights over me.
Now, tell me a little bit about what your day would look like within, I think it's a 12-hour shift? Like
10 hours usually, sometimes 12s. Yeah.
Fully masked. I mean, what are the protocols already in place that you've consented to at this point?
Okay, so before we enter the building, in the parking lot at least I would fill out a COVID questionnaire. Email it in, and you basically say, okay, have a safe day if you've answered no to all the questions. Then you would go in and go through security, at which point you're getting your temperature checked and you're asked more questions. At that point, of course, masked the second you walk in the building. You go, you get changed, you get ready for work, you go down. At that point, it's 100% masking, 100% of the time. Even outside, it doesn't matter whether there's no one within 100 feet of you. As a matter of fact, you're told you will be escorted off the premises immediately if the mask goes below your nose and you're seen. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, to me, that's excessive. And the funny thing is, of course, there's exceptions. Anyone in an office that can sit 6 feet away, that's okay. Or if you're a smoker, you can go to the smoking area and you can take your mask down and have a cigarette. Mm-hmm. The only other place that you can breathe is a lunchroom, when you're seated at a table with plexiglass in between you. If you get up from that table, and I know one person who was escorted out for that, to throw something in the garbage, you're out. So the mask better be on if you step up, if you stand up from that table.
Mm-hmm. So protocols in place are already very strict.
Excessive, in my opinion.
So there's been a grievance filed.
I believe so, yes.
The ROE that you have yet to receive will state that you've quit,
I
even
believe
though
so.
you
That's
are
what I'm
willing
told.
and able to work.
Correct.
And you want to work.
Of course.
And this happened, a week before Christmas?
Exactly, yeah. December 17th at 10 o'clock at night.
Do you have a message for your fellow employees, your employer, the union?
I guess basically you have to do what you think is right. I did what I think is right. I think it's time for people to stand up. If we don't stand up at some point, where does it end? What will be the next thing? We all know vaccines. Some people won't have a problem with that. What's the next step? Will we be testing at home? Will we put a breathalyzer by our door to make sure we haven't had a drink the night before? Can the companies check on that too? I mean, I know unions across Ontario have fought drug testing forever. Why can't we fight this?
Now, since the time of this interview, a few things have transpired. The union has denied Joe his grievance, citing a case precedence which was a nursing home. The grievance that Ironworkers International referred Joe to was one done by the Christian Labour Association of Canada, Local 303, on behalf of a number of its members working at a retirement home located in Woodstock, Ontario. It's interesting because this grievance confirms everything laid out in the Panbio AG Rapid Antigen COVID-19 product monograph, which is where I pulled all of the questions I asked the union, ACON, and the Ontario Power Generation. The product monograph states that the test identifies potentially contagious individuals and is most accurate on days 0 to 3 post-symptom onset or suspected exposure, with days 4 to 7 being slightly less accurate at detecting positives. Under intended use, the test pamphlet states it is for individuals who meet COVID-19 clinical and/or epidemiological criteria. It continues to state negative results don't preclude SARS-CoV-2 infection and they cannot be used as the sole basis for treatment or other management decisions. So here were my questions. I wanted to know if there was a policy in place for testing asymptomatic workers, which obviously it appears that there is, and if so, can either Joe or I be provided with a copy? Apart from that loosely worded screenshot. I copied out the time frame for accuracy listed in the product monograph, and I asked how they decided upon testing people roughly every 2 weeks. I asked how asymptomatic people met the criteria for clinical and/or epidemiological outlines by the product monograph. And if the test doesn't preclude infection, what was the goal of this apparent policy and how would the success be measured? Then, of course, the reliability of this rapid test has been determined using the follow-up PCR test, which is perhaps a story for another day. As is the way, no one could answer my questions. Fred MacPherson, business manager and financial secretary-treasurer for 721, asked me to call him. Here is what he had to say.
They have rules to work there. Before you can work there, they infringe on your rights by making you get a security clearance. They want to see your criminal record. This is a condition to get there. I have 80 people working at this facility. 79 took a test, one wouldn't. Should I jeopardize the 79 for the one?
Well, that wasn't part of my
I do
questions.
not make the rules at OPG.
And do you mind?
The rules are made by them.
Do you
My
mind?
union members can go to work if they follow OPG's rules. And if you break any rule while you're inside that, it's up to them to let you go. I have filed a grievance on behalf of Joe. I don't have a game plan for COVID. It's never happened before.
Right.
Now,
And
how did it work for you? Did you pay your fine?
no, I did not, but that has nothing to do with what I'm investigating now. So you said that you don't make the rules. Do you mind putting me in touch with someone who does make the rules?
Oh, you call OPG.
Okay. Do you have a contact?
No, I don't. Ontario Power Generation, EPSCA. They have their own agreement. They have their own language. They have their own contracts.
Okay. And so the union's not developing any of this on their own. This is all being set
No.
forth
This is being imposed on me by the government.
by OPG.
Yes.
Okay. I'll contact OPG and then,
Joe was not fired. Joe quit. Because conditions to work on the job was take a test.
and do you have a policy that I could,
We have a dispatch here. I have all kinds of work. Joe can go to work anywhere else. But when the next company says, come in my doors, you have to have a test. What do I say to them?
perhaps some of the questions I've outlined in my email?
No, your questions, ask the politician about your question. I'm running a $500 million business here, and I'm going to protect the majority.
Fred spent more time deflecting issues onto me and touting some rights infringements about guys getting security clearances. Please. My questions were technical, and I knew that. But still, I wanted answers on behalf of Joe. After all, the union is supposed to advocate for the employees, and Joe alleges that no one wants this testing. They comply because they fear job loss. That's the definition of coercion. Here's how I reframed my questions. Can the union impose new employment conditions without the consent of the employee? if not the union, who advocates for employees that do not want to be force tested? I inquired about Joe's record of employment, showing that he quit when he's quite willing and capable to work. I asked for confirmation. Again, I asked to see a policy and protocols document. Liz Barrows, president of Local 721, let me know that the union didn't impose this protocol. He said that I should ask OPG and Can-Am, or ACON, which I did. No one responded. He let me know that trade union consent is not required for the introduction or application of workplace rules and regulations, and then said that they do not intend to comment further on the specifics of this case out of respect for the privacy of their members and to protect the integrity of the dispute resolution mechanisms under their collective agreement. Once again, no accountability, no one to advocate for Joe, who simply questioned the reliability of a screenshot policy and wanted to see tangible policies and procedures document. Is that really asking too much? Eventually, Joe did have his ROE updated to reflect that he was laid off, but his grievance was denied, and unless he consents to being force tested by a test whose limitations listed on page 6 of the product monograph are questionably reliable at best, every 2-ish weeks, he's not allowed on site at OPG. All while the union sources some apples to oranges comparison of a nursing home grievance precedents only denied because, quote, COVID is highly infectious and often deadly for the elderly. I'm pretty sure that's a non-issue at OPG. Now, at the time of this report, apparently all testing has been delayed until further notice. Joe still doesn't have his job back, but at least the testing is stopped, temporarily. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Did you know we have cool new swag available on our online store at rebelnewsstore.com? For a limited time, we're offering free shipping on all hoodies and tees across North America. Check it out at rebelnewsstore.com.